My name is Gretchen Hernandez. I am the founder of My Freedom Grove. My Freedom Grove provides a safe place for compassionate men to come together for some self-coaching, for some self-development, and also to collaborate with other men to try to help each other in business and in life so that they can all rise together. So I started my journey 25 years ago, starting off as a microbiologist. So I always wanted to help other people. So in any kind of job that I worked at, there was always someone at the other end that had some kind of a condition that was either threatening their well-being or threatening their life. So I eventually started to work in the pharmaceutical industry, where I worked at a wonderful company that was making cancer medicine. And I had the fortunate opportunity to have a lot of self-development opportunities, lots of different courses or going to conferences and learning all sorts of tools along the way. And I eventually transitioned into a role as a business and cultural transformation coach for this large international corporation. So I got to see a lot of the dynamics of change, and my job was to try to help people to process change. And then in the last 3 years was a lot on a cultural transformation. So we had to completely change mindsets of people. And this was everyone in the organization, all the way from the CEO to every single person working and helping to create the medicine. And one of the things that I started to see a lot was that things that we thought were good behaviors at one point in our life, now we were being challenged saying, no, that's not the right behavior. That's the wrong behavior. And we want you to go and do this kind of behavior. And that was really interesting because the new behavior they were saying to do was something that we had traditionally always thought was the wrong thing to do.
Can you give an example of what that would have been?
Exactly. So, yes, I can. So, for example, leaders in traditional America are always told that you have to show up as hard and stern, and there's a lot of discipline involved and holding people accountable. The change that we were being asked to deliver with these new leaders or with the existing leaders was to change their mindset into being compassionate and curious and allowing the folks to take as long as they needed to learn and to make a ton of mistakes. It was all about the learning. So they had to try to step back from the results driven of just deliver, and everything has to be completely perfect to I'm going to set this like strange goal out. Well, it's not a strange goal, but I'm going to set this aspirational goal and you have to figure out how to get there on your own.
You know, it reminds me a little bit of the very first time I read Brene Brown's Daring Greatly. And I know I've read this again in Rising Strong, is her going into corporations and her trying to explain to corporations the need to be vulnerable, to be able to make mistakes, because the mistakes are the catalyst for learning and making something fantastic, that nothing is ever made out of the box right the first way. And too often, especially large corporations, they never wanted to see anybody making mistakes, which means they couldn't be vulnerable. They had to be perfect all the time. But especially in science, it's like try and try again to get to the right spot. So did you feel like that was a big shift where you were working?
That was a huge shift because in the beginning, nobody was vulnerable. And I call it getting out on the dance floor alone. So we had one leader who was trying to show what it would be like. So she was great. She'd get up in front of hundreds of people and she allowed herself to be completely vulnerable and share a time of when she didn't get it right the first time, of when she had a complete and utter flop, and then what she learned from it and how she was able to grow and get out there and try again and fail again. And it was heartbreaking for me to watch this very first time, because what I saw was she was out there dancing on the dance floor all by herself. None of the other leaders got up there with her.
And
And
is that because
so,
it was going to be too vulnerable for them?
right, because everybody is at a different stage in being willing to do a new change. And so even being vulnerable is a new change of sharing when did you mess up? Because we were always told as leaders, you're supposed to show up as being absolutely perfect.
It's
And
just
so
such a
now
hard
to show up
thing
and say,
to, it's a hard thing to sustain. It's impossible to sustain, but it's also a hard thing to try to strive for because it's not reality.
to be vulnerable.
No, to be perfect,
Oh, absolutely. Oh my
right?
gosh, that's kind of the cornerstone of freedom, right? If we can be completely free to be our authentic selves and to show up vulnerably and to have other people not judge us and jump all over us, we're going to have a better world.
And a better life will be so much happier.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Is that every time that we get out there and we do something, we're always experimenting. It's not about whether we get out and we have success or we have failure. We're getting out and we're trying something new. We're experimenting. And every time it's not, did we win or did we lose? It's what did we learn? What worked for
So
us?
would you
Didn't,
consider
what would
this
we
is
change?
like the concept of it's about the process, not the destination, or it's about the journey and not the destination, or the process and not the final product kind of concept?
Absolutely. Yep. It's enjoying the journey.
Mm-hmm.
It's enjoying the journey because that's actually where all of the gold is going to come from, is that when we can start to look at what obstacles it was that we were working through and what were all of the different experiments and how did we come through on the other side, because the solution we come up with might not be anything of what we thought it was going to be. And so that's kind of why I have this message of stop just like pushing through and gritting our teeth and just do it mentality, because we're often going to come up with a solution that isn't anywhere as good as what it could be. And it usually doesn't feel good for anybody.
Mm.
So if we take this other approach, we have a lot more compassion, curiosity, but also as we turn around to try to help other people, we can be vulnerable in what it was that we had that obstacle with. And instead of saying, yeah, I just sucked it up and pushed through, you can say, I had this obstacle. Here are all of the different experiments that I did, and this is what worked and what didn't. And that is so much more helpful than just grit your teeth and push through it, because we have a huge amount of shame that we all carry. And when someone says, oh, well, I just pushed through it and I did this, it's going to evoke a shame response in the
The
individual
other
that's going to
people that
cause them.
they couldn't.
Exactly.
Mm.
And so that's why knowing this Kubler Ross change curve is really helpful, because you'll be able to see how does every human process any kind of change. And the experiments you'll see will start to go through each of those different stages of change to help them get from one place to another. So the Kubler Ross change curve was something that was developed to process grief of some event happened, typically a death of someone, and then what are all of the different stages that a survivor of that relative or loved one goes through so that they can process their life and be able to go on and have this life without this other person. But what I found was that all of these stages help us with processing any kind of change. And we can look at it from different perspectives. We can look at it as ourself going through all of these different changes, or we can look at it as we're someone that wants to help the person who's going through the change. And it helps us to recognize when are we the right person for them at that particular point along their change journey.
So let me pull up, because I had asked you to send me the Kubler Ross image, so you could kind of guide people through all of these different stages. Let me see if I can actually blow it up a little bit for you. Are you able to see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. So could you kind of take people through, like, I think right now there are lots of people that are going through grief in a lot of different ways. And, you know, some people are losing loved ones, but at the same time, We're also all experiencing the loss of our original quote unquote norm.
Mhm.
And I know you and I were talking about how this can be used even in that kind of circumstance too.
Absolutely. All
So can
right.
you take us through this Kubler Ross change curve?
Sure. And it looked like it shrunk back down. I don't know if
Okay.
there's
Was
a
it
way you
better when
can.
it was bigger for you?
It was. It was. And I think for anyone who's looking at it for the first time, it'll help to be able to see it. Now,
Are you
for
able to?
anyone that wants to see it afterwards, they can go and Google Kubler Ross Change Curve, and there'll be a couple of different images that pop up for it. They all have these different stages. I personally like this one because you'll see that there's these boxes over on the right. They give you a little bit of a clue as to if you're going to be someone that's helping someone else through a change curve, what are the activities that you want to try to keep in mind? Because that's what's going to help the person move from one stage to the next. So you'll see on here that there's 5 different colored dots. I actually like to talk about all 7 of the stages. So you'll see that shock and integration don't have a colored dot, but I like to talk about those too, because those in themselves, there's a support that people will need for that particular stage. So a shock is usually when something has changed, right? So say, for example, when we were told we have to start wearing face masks out in public, that's something totally different. It's a shock to our system. It's not something that we like, and it's not something that we chose for ourselves, right? So that
Right.
would be our shock. Eventually, once we get over to the integration side, we are loving our masks. We're having a lot of fun with them. And in fact, we don't even want to leave the house without them in some cases, right? So, but we had to process that change to get there. The next stage on the change curve is denial. So that shock can sometimes last for a while. Like sometimes you'll see someone almost not responsive. They don't even know what to talk about. They don't know how to process it. So the next stage is going into the denial, where they're looking for evidence that it's not true. So when we found out about the mask, at first, we're going to start looking around, seeing why is it not true that we don't have to wear this mask, and trying to justify that we don't have to change. We eventually get into a frustration phase. This is also, I call this anxiety and anger phase, because this is when we're arguing with reality. So we've already accepted that this change is coming whether we like it or not, but we haven't accepted the change itself. And we
And what
are
do you think that looks like, Gretchen? Like, we know what the denial piece looks like, but
Mhm.
I think for so many people, there was a lot of emotion at the very beginning of this pandemic. And I feel like that frustration piece, it's the different way that people deal with frustration was probably huge.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so there's 2 different sides of it. So I'd mentioned there's the anger part of it, and there's the anxiety. So you have folks that will express a lot of anger, whether they're yelling, whether they're out protesting, whether they're just absolutely refusing to do it. Like they now know that is what the rule is, but they're going to try to fight it. And they might even try to fight the rule makers themselves. So it's a little bit different than the denial, because in the denial, they're trying to show that the rule doesn't actually exist. So in the beginning, they might have been looking at other states and saying, well, that state doesn't have it in this state, so our state must not really have it, or they're not going to actually have this rule. Whereas anger is now you realize that your state is going to have this rule and you're really, really mad about it, and you're blaming other people. And so you'll see a lot of the finger pointing and, again, trying to express a lot of anger towards the lawmakers. The lawmakers didn't want to have to come up with this. They don't want to deny anybody's freedom, but they're put in this job to have to try to figure out what is in the best interest of the whole, every person, right? The anxiety part of it is when you are past the anger, but you still don't really want to do it. So you're still arguing, you're thinking about all of the ways that this impacts you, and maybe you don't know how to get a mask, or you're scared to even wear the mask. Like, is this going to cause a respiratory infection for you? Or is this going to cause you a lot of pain from the bands that you have to wear? It's that anxiety of not wanting to process your feelings about it is another part of it, right? Because there is a certain change that you have to go through, and you're going to feel feelings on it. And if we don't allow ourselves to just feel the feelings and allow it to pass, we're going to have some anxiety about it.
Mm.
So the next stage is depression. And so with the depression is when you realize that you can't change this. It's going to happen and you're going to have to comply. And some people, this might not last very long. Some people, they might start to really internalize it in a dangerous way of, and the mask might not be the right example for this one, where it gets into a dangerous level. But when they start to say that all of this was their fault, or it's because of something that they did, that now they're being punished in a way that is extreme, and that there's nothing they can do, and they don't want this kind of life, and they might try to seek some type of a way of escaping the kind of pain that they're going through. So this is where it's really important to try to find the people that know how to get someone out of that kind of depression. And there's again different severities of that depression. So if someone's trying to escape, they're trying to escape from the pain, and will spend a lot of time worried about people and how they're trying to escape. So we've seen a rise in the opioid usage, and we've seen several deaths recently as a result of that. The people were just trying to escape their pain, and they didn't know any other way of escaping the pain. And they might have encountered someone in their life that was worried about the drug use that they were seeing, and those people with big hearts, thinking that they were helping, would focus on the use of the pill itself.
Versus
And
the cause of the pain originally.
exactly. And so when they focus on the use of the pill, the way that they're framing things could be evoking more of a shame response for the person, that person can't handle their pain, and they have to turn to something such as this, or that they're a bad person for using this, when the best way to help these people is to acknowledge the pain that they're going through, and try to help them find someone that has had that kind of pain before. So this is that vulnerability, right? Someone else that has experienced that exact kind of pain and is willing to talk about their pain, and what were all of the different experiments that they tried that worked for them. And that person might have also experienced trying out some different pills to try to alleviate the pain. They might have gone, they tried alcohol or food or something else, but eventually they found something that was healthy for them that worked. And a lot of times that might be a change in the mindset of what specific thoughts did they switch to other thoughts. But finding a person that has that, that's where the magic really happens. That's why in 12-step programs, one of the things that is a really great piece is having a sponsor. A sponsor is someone that has already lived that experience, and they've done all of that experimentation. They tend to be the ones that would stand up and speak about what they went through. They become that lighthouse to someone still going through their storm. And it helps that person who's feeling the depression to realize that they're not alone, and that this pain is something that's normal,
I
and that
think
it's
this
something that can be
piece
worked
right
through.
here, Gretchen, that we're talking about, the depression piece, is actually why I started this interview series. Because I want people to know that they're not alone. And each person that I bring in as a guest speaker, I purposefully bring in designed to show people that what they're experiencing is universal. Like, this change curve is so phenomenal. I'm like blown away, because we talked about it, but we didn't talk about it the way we're doing it right now. And I can see each piece of this. It could be procuring food.
Yes.
I'm in denial that I can't go to the food store anymore. I'm frustrated because the way I want to get food is not as easy. Now I'm feeling depressed because it's just too hard of work, and then experimenting with new things and getting up and finally getting to the, end where you're integrating into your life. But it's like all the small things and the big things can fit into this kind of change curve. And it's this piece right here, the depression piece, that I know is so high right now, that my goal with this series and with all of the stuff that I've been sharing mental health related on Facebook or on Instagram is to share with people whatever it is that you're feeling may be unique, but the circumstance is not, and you're not alone in this circumstance. It's such a huge part of the problem, because I think too many people, especially using social media, and I only use that as an example because that's where we're sharing this interview, a lot of people don't want people to know that they're struggling, right? It goes back to what you were talking about before, when you were talking about what was going on in your corporate work, where there was supposed to be this perception of nothing's ever wrong, and flipping it to we have to be vulnerable. There are still going to be people on social media, they're going to make the perception appear that they got this. The reality that they've got this is so small, but they're not being vulnerable enough to share that they don't, right? And so then you have people comparing, that frustration happens, that low mood happens, the lack of energy, because they don't feel like they're doing it the way, like you said, there's shame that other people are, but that's not the reality anyway. And so I try to come in and show the good, the raw, and the bad, so people know that they're not struggling on their own.
Exactly. And that is such a wonderful service to offer to the world. And I have started to find other people out in the world that are just like us, that are willing to share our stories. And we're putting it out there on social media so that we can try to reach as many people as we can, to let them know that they're not alone. And especially if we can be very specific in what was the struggle that we had, because then it attracts the people that are still having that struggle, that they know you're their person. And one of the other things that I wanted to bring up is, along this, where we have the denial, the frustration, and the depression, is that there's different roles that us as coaches or informal coaches in life, that along that change curve, we may have a specialty to help them to move from one of those spots to the next spot. So like, I specialize in depression and anxiety. I don't specialize in the denial. I use my podcast as a way to help people that are in that denial stage to move forward. And so with that, I have many lessons that I use in my podcast, but I also bring on other men that are willing to talk about what they've gone through, because there's men out in the world that have not acknowledged what happened, or they're trying to stuff it down. And so these brave men that are out there in the social media world, and they're sharing their stories, they're performing a service for other people. They're being incredibly courageous. And I want to give them an additional platform where they can come and they can share their stories, because my audience is mixed of people that are suffering from something and they don't have an outlet. They don't know that they're not all alone. So now they have an opportunity to hear from someone who might have been experiencing something that they're going through. I also have a lot of folks that are looking for ways to help themselves. So these many lessons that I give them can help them move through this change curve. And then I have folks that are also trying to establish more skill sets so that they can help other people. And one of the things I like to try to help people to do is also figure out how can they live their purpose by helping other people and make an income. So I know there's a lot of coaches out there that are trying to develop you to get rich quick, and that's not where I come from. Mine is all heart-based. I want to help as many people as possible. I have a mission to lower the men's suicide rate, and it's going to take a huge amount of people and a grassroots effort, because it comes from having each man be vulnerable about what they've been going through, because other men out there in the world, they're looking to all of the men, and the quantity of men that are willing to be vulnerable and to share what they're going through is pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that once we get more men that are willing to share their story because they have felt the power of transformation, of once they've gone through this whole change curve, that they realize that they didn't ever have to feel that pain, that there are ways that they can process this so that they don't have the pain. And it's going to feel so profound, they're going to want to turn around and help other people.
I love it. It's amazing. And it's making me think of the gentleman that I interviewed for my episode 6 and 7, Craig Joseph, who vulnerably and courageously shared his personal struggle with bipolar, and what he did to get through that process, and what, like you said, it's like all about the process, all of the lessons he learned on that journey, painful and good, and then where it brought him now. And his whole goal is to help other people who are struggling with the same thing. So I think also, Gretchen, those of us, I think it's almost impossible to do what you do, to do what I do, to do what Craig does, without having gone through our own journey and being awakened within that journey as well, right? Let's keep going. So we've got
Okay.
the depression area. What happens in the experimental part of the change curve?
So the experimental part is when the person has decided that they don't want to be in the depression anymore. So they have made that decision that they actually want to have a life, right? And a life hopefully that doesn't have pain. So they're willing to go out and try some different things so that they can get out of that pain. So they might, I mean, if we're looking at depression, they might be trying things like yoga or Reiki or talking with other people, or maybe a 12-step program, something like that. If it's something like what you had brought up about the food situation, maybe it's someone that never thought they ever had to go to a food pantry, but now because they're not able to go to work, they don't have income and they don't have a way of getting food. And they might not have ever thought that they would go and accept any help because they're usually the one that is giving the help.
Right.
They had to process through the whole change curve to even get to the point where they were willing to accept help. And so now they might go and experiment and go to a food closet where they can get some and see what that's like. And there might be some that work for them and some that don't work for them. They might find some that have long lines and some that don't. Right? So they're going to get out, they're going to experiment. And excuse me, from that experiment, they're going to learn what worked for them,
I
what
can
didn't.
see this too, like with unemployment, like shock that everything's going to shut down, denial and disbelief that I've lost my job, anger and anxiety that I've lost my job. Now we get into that low depression, and now the experiment is, oh my God, I have to engage in a new situation. I need to file for unemployment. Whereas before, maybe you were the person that was constantly employing people and hiring. Like, I can see how this works in every situation. This pandemic has so many layers to it.
Absolutely.
And yes, I see it with the food bank and all of that. And then I also think about all of these people who probably, there's so many people that have probably had expectations that they were always entitled to a job,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they never ever considered what somebody else might be going through. And now they have to go through this experience. And I personally think that so much of this change curve, and this, all of us are going through this change right now. There's nobody that is not in some way, shape, or form. The gift will be the transformation that people allow themselves to gain through the process. And the crime or the tragedy will be people that do not allow themselves to change and experience transformation during the change curve. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We have a choice of if we want to progress through the change curve or not.
Mm,
And what you'll notice is over on this side, it talks about the morale and the competence. So
This
I
part
like to,
over here. Oh, over here. Okay.
yeah, I'm sorry, you can't see where I'm pointing.
I know.
The left side, yes, so it's talking about the morale. So it's basically what type of feelings are we having? And you'll notice that you start off feeling kind of okay, and that eventually you're going to start to go down. You're going to start feeling pretty awful. You have that choice of any of the changes that you're going through of how long you want to stay feeling awful. But when you look at this change curve, you can see that once you start to experiment and you're starting to make some decisions of the changes that you're going to make in your life, you're going to start feeling better.
And I think it's fair to say too that, you know, look, it's not a surprise that this change curve looks like a roller coaster, right? And people
Yes.
will talk about being on a roller coaster of emotions. So you might go from denial to frustration, back to denial, from frustration to depression, back to denial, from frustration to experiment, back down to depression. Like it's going to go up and down, up and down. You're not going to go in this curve straight through without perhaps backing out and backing into some of these parts over and over again so you can kind of get over the hump, right?
And it can be that as we're having our different thoughts, right? Because any kind of change, we're going to have a whole bunch of different thoughts. Even changing our thoughts can go through this change curve. So we may have 7 different thoughts, and we have to process all of them into something else that works for
Oh my
us.
God. You know,
And
it's no
so like
wonder
breaking
so
it
many
down
of
for
us
each
are
of those.
so exhausted,
Yeah.
especially at the very beginning. Honestly, I want people who are watching this to think back to, 11 weeks ago at the very beginning of this change curve, or the very, very beginning of the pandemic. And I remember saying to my husband, I'm exhausted. And it would be like 6, 7 o'clock at night. And I don't have young children at home. My children are teenagers. Our setup's been pretty quiet. I'm very lucky in that respect, but I was coming away. I felt like a wet rag by like 7 o'clock every night. And it's no wonder, because I think we were processing so
Absolutely.
much of the emotion associated, right?
There's the emotion, there's the mental energy of switching from one thought to a different thought, or else looking for all of the different thoughts we can think about the situation that will help us to move forward.
And I think, again, the shame comes in so big because, I know for me, if somebody calls me and says how you're doing, if I'm having a bad day, I'm going to tell them I'm having a bad day because I'm a no BS person. But there are plenty of people you can be like, oh my God, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. I'm getting through it. And so then when you hear that, you're like, well, shit, they're getting through it fine. Like, why can't I get through it fine? And again, that's why I try to do this kind of interview series, because I say anybody who says they're absolutely fine through this whole thing is either a rock star or totally full of BS. Because the majority of people, we're going through this still. And like you said, it could be on anything. Like, I used to work in the wedding industry. So say you've got a couple that's supposed to be getting married. They're going and they can't get married, say right now, because of what's going on. They have to go through this whole change curve, right?
Yep.
There's shock, there's denial, there's frustration, there's depression. Like, okay,
Mhm.
maybe I need to think about it a little differently. And all of it really is mentally and emotionally taxing. I'm absolutely fascinated by this. I'm so excited that you brought it to my attention. Okay, so we know what experiment is. What's the next level?
Yeah, so the decision is when we have experimented with a bunch of different things that now we've figured out what is that final solution that's going to work for us. So remember, with each experiment, we're figuring out what worked, what didn't work, what would we try next time. So even in the wedding industry, there's all those different things they're going to experiment with. Do we want to keep the same date? If they keep the same date, then there's a whole bunch of experiments on how do we still do this with the same date, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when they get to that decision, it can be just specifically on that one thing, because remember, we're saying you can break down all of your changes into each individual thing, and each one goes through the change curve, right? So having that decision, it feels so much better once you have a decision, because now you know how to move forward. But when we get stuck in indecision, we start to do that backslide back down to depression or possibly even anxiety. And that's where the overwhelm comes. So once we make that decision, it feels so much better. We know what we're going to do. We found a solution that will work for us. And now we can go on to the final stage, which is integration, which is we're actually doing that new way of life.
I am like, I'm just going to stop sharing this image so we can go back. I am beyond, and I just need to be able to see my screen here. I am so glad that we decided to talk about this today. And I'm going to do my best to make sure as many people as possible can see this, because this is so incredibly important for people to wrap their brains around. Because I just don't think that there is anybody that is not going through this all day long. Everybody. And to that point, I was having a conversation with a gal this morning. I had to drop, she's a business partner of mine in Rodana Fields, and we had samples we were swapping. And we both have freshmen at our local high school, and we were talking about the decisions that have to be made by the state, by the Department of Health and Human Services, by the Department of Education, that get filtered down to the schools, that get filtered down to the superintendents, the principals, on how they're going to adjust for September.
Right.
And how it needs to start now. And I can see even that change curve going on, like you said, just the smallest little things. Exactly. And I said to her, I'm so glad I don't have to be a part of that decision. So I'm trying really hard not to judge the way that they're deciding to do it, because I don't want to be, you know, the person in the crowd shaming the man in the arena. But at the same time, it's like, I have a lot of empathy for the people that have to make these major changes inside corporations, these retail stores, opening, closing restaurants, the education space, the colleges. Like, the colleges have such a difficult decision ahead of them, whether or not to open. I mean, there's so many things. And I hope that people can watch this and understand that they need to be compassionate with others as they are going through their change curve, regardless of what it is.
Right. And that there's other people that are also going through their change curve. Is that for every incident, there's several different roles that have to happen. Each person has to go through their change curve and trying to figure out what's going to work for them for that one change. So you had mentioned schools. And I have witnessed our local schools and the administrators and the teachers trying to figure out new technology, right? They've never had to do it this way before. And they had to be running their business at the same time. Their business is delivering the education. So although us as parents, we're like, how are we going to homeschool our kids? We have our own role that we're trying to figure out. The kids have their role of how are we going to try to learn, and we really just want to go play video games instead, but you know, we have to learn. And then you have the teachers that are trying to figure out, well, what's all of the technology and how do I do this? And they're supposed to be doing it right then and there. So it's like, yeah, that we can think about next fall, and there's a lot to figure out with that, but these people had to figure it out right now and run their business at the exact same time. That is tough stuff to figure out. So,
it really is.
Yeah. So just have a lot of compassion for everybody that's going on or going out there, all of the different changes, realize that we all have a different role in it. And then are there ways that we can help each other? So say, for example, someone that was having that technology challenge. If you're someone that has experienced a technology challenge before and now you have figured it all out, offer to share with them. Share your vulnerability of the technology challenge you had and what it was that you figured out. Just throw it out there as a Facebook post, because someone out there didn't even realize that they needed that help. But now that you've been so vulnerable and you shared it, they're like, oh my gosh, that was me too. Oh, this experiment could be right for me. and they could give
It's
it a
funny that you say that, because I have a good friend of mine. She owns a nonprofit, where she's the founder of a nonprofit. And she messaged me over the weekend and she says, there's word on the street that you know how to push Zoom Live to Facebook.
yes.
And I don't know how to do it. Can you please help me? And I'm like, yeah. But my ability to present an interview the way that we're doing it right now didn't come without mistakes. I had to
Mhm.
figure it out. And this is a result of not being able to do the workshops that I originally planned on doing for this year. And so I had to make a change. And they say necessity is the mother of invention, right? So we're all in the process. I think there's very few people that are in the process of having to really reevaluate the way that things are done,
Mhm.
right? It's just, and I think that I wrote this down before because I wanted to bring this up. I think it's really hard for a lot of people to change, because there's so many people that love the comfort of consistency and the comfort of predictability.
Mhm.
There is nothing consistent or predictable about this pandemic. The only thing that's super predictable and consistent about it is its unpredictability, right? And so what I have found is getting a lot of phone calls from family members or close friends who know I kind of specialize in the mindset work, saying, I'm feeling horrible. I have so much anxiety. I'm so overwhelmed. And I'm like, well, how much have you leaned in and accepted what is? Because my feeling is that so many, one of the things I learned in my decades of therapy, and really the best therapist I ever had was the one that brought this to my attention. She's a clinical hypnotherapist, wonderful, wonderful gal here in New Jersey, if anyone's looking. And she basically was like, you put the word to the feeling that you have in your chest. You call it anxiety, right? And that feeling in your chest is your gut going against what the reality is.
Mhm.
Your being going against what the reality is. And so you're struggling. That feeling is a struggle. It's an internal struggle. You label it anxiety, which I thought was fascinating, because it's not aligned with what you think should be. But if you can just surrender and lean into it should be because it is, and take away this idea of, well, it should have been something. No, you wanted it to be something, if this makes sense. But the reality is here, and you're not willing to accept the reality. You're fighting it. And so therefore you have this internal physical struggle, and we're calling it anxiety. And I see that in so many people right now, because they're probably still at the top of that denial,
Mhm.
right? At the top of that curve.
Mhm.
And it could be of the pandemic. I know there's still people I talk to that are like in denial that this is a real problem, or of a portion of what they have to change because they would rather it be consistent from what it always was to now, right? Oh, Gretchen, if we could help the world one person at a time.
That's right. Well, by
Yeah.
us sharing our knowledge on how we can help other people, we're developing more people that can turn around and help other people. We're going to have this great butterfly effect. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing,
Mm.
because you're going to be also amplifying that, amplifying people's skills and allowing everybody to be able to turn around and help other people.
That is the goal. So I know I want to wrap this up with you. There are two things I would like you to share. First is very specifically why, I know you and I have talked about this. You selected a niche of your work to work primarily with men. And also, how can people find you? What kind of services do you have to offer? And if somebody wanted to know more about what it is that you do, how can they find you?
Okay. Yes, I'd be more than happy to share. So I chose to work with men because I saw, well, there's two parts. I saw that there were so many opportunities for women and their mental health and also for their personal development. I know because I got to experience it myself. But when I looked around, I saw that there were only a few men that were coming into the program. But I'm looking at the program and, well, it's completely geared to women. And a lot of them have women empowerment type of things, which is great and it feels good. But sometimes it's not actually supporting the men. And so one specific one that I went to is the Professional Business Women's Conference that happens in California every year. Absolutely love it. And women walk out of there feeling like $1,000,000. They've learned a whole bunch of stuff. It's helped them so much in their lives, in their businesses, at work, everywhere. I started to talk to the 200 men that showed up with the 6,000 women. And I was asking them, why did they come? And they said, well, we want to be here to support the women, of course. I said, well, what about you guys? You know, do you get to have that kind of support, that kind of development opportunities? And I was surprised that many of them like kind of emotionally slumped into this posture of, is that okay? Am I allowed to do that? And I thought, oh my gosh, you're human just like we are. Why can't you have these development opportunities? And we have no problem with all of these events that are just for women. But somehow along the way, we created this stigma that it's not okay for men to have something just for themselves, to take care of them and to help them develop. Why did we do that? Right? So
Because men
I
are not
wanted,
supposed to be vulnerable, right? Isn't this what we've been taught? I mean, this is what these young boys are taught. Be strong, be a man, don't show your feelings. You know, they're taught to not feel so often.
and I
Um,
personally think all of those rules are stupid.
yeah,
In fact, I just released a
huge
podcast episode
pattern.
yesterday on gender roles where I was talking about that. We're all just human. We think that there's supposed to be a set of rules for women and a set of rules for men, yet we changed all the rules for women and we kept the rules for the men. It's
Mm.
completely jacked up, in my opinion. I think there's other ways that we can go about it of just, we're all human. We all have the same kind of needs. And here's how we can start to look at things as like activity-based things. And whether you like the activity or you don't like the activity. Emotions, everybody's allowed to show whatever emotions they need to. Look at that change curve. You need to show all of those emotions to process change. If you're only allowed to show the emotions at the first part of the curve, how are you ever going to get to the other side? And that
But we
leads
say
into the
that because there's
second.
so many people that they never grow as humans, right?
Yeah,
Emotionally,
and
they
they
just kind of
suffer,
stay stunted. Yeah.
and they stay there with all of this pain. Like we saw the morale curve or the morale side of the change curve. They're staying stuck in these awful feelings, but they don't even get to express them. They don't get to learn how to process through all of it so that they can feel better. They're just expected to put on this happy face and march through and be the strong person for everybody else out there. Well,
Mm.
that's not healthy. So what we saw was an increase in the suicide rates for men. If we look at the statistics, women are definitely committing suicide. And this is very personal to me because I've had many times in my life where I got suicidal. My last time, I call it my white light moment, was in 2017, where I had the successful life. I was making really great money. I was doing what I was passionate about. And I had the home, I had the family, I had everything. And yet I had to fight suicide every single day. I'd drive home along this 1 or 2 lane highway, and there were these telephone poles. And I had to fight the urge to run into the telephone poles every single day. And it didn't make any sense to me. And I had tried all sorts of different ways of resolving what my pain was, but I didn't know how to do it. And I was having problems with access to care. I couldn't get to a counselor. I had great insurance, but our counseling field was impacted. I couldn't get in for more than 2 years. And it wasn't until I found, luckily from a Facebook ad, my first life coach. And all of a sudden, my mind was just blown. She was helping me in so many ways. She had a free podcast. I went and I started listening to her free podcast, and all of a sudden, she's teaching me all these things. And it's helping me to be able to process the things that I'm going through. And my pain level started to drop as a result. And then she offered a coaching program that I got into. And all of a sudden I had courses I could take. I could have one-on-one coaching, all of these great things. And I started to feel so much better. And it was available to me 24/7 whenever I needed it. I didn't have to wait for an appointment that only happened once a week for someone that didn't know anything about my background. She was teaching me how to coach myself, self-coaching skills, because
And
I'm
is that what
available.
you're trying to do with these men?
Exactly. So um, I want to tell a little bit more first before I tell about that part. So why I wanted to also focus on men is that I have two sons that both became suicidal at age 12. And being a mom, I wanted to try to help them. And I found that although I had all of these skills, this was, they're almost adults at this point, or one already is, I didn't have the right skill set to be able to help them. And it was the most sorrowful experience that I ever had, was that here were my sons that were ready to leave this world, and there was nothing that I knew how to do to help them. And so I needed to tag in the experts. One of my sons actually had to go into a hospital facility for a week because I was so scared that we weren't going to be able to save him. And I needed to find the people that knew how to help him. My husband also has had a lot of suicidal ideology. Last year, he saw the aftermath of a man who had jumped off of a bridge, and he saw this man laying on the ground. And he told me that at this moment, as he's standing there with other people all surrounding this man and looking down, that he felt this overwhelming sense of peace, that this man had shown him the way out of his pain. And I knew, no, there's men that they don't know the skills for how to process their emotions and how to get out of their pain. So this looks like the only way out. I need to be able to provide something to the men. And if access to care is something that gets in the way, or they don't want to be able to even say, hey, I need to go see a counselor, let's give another option. So that's why I created My Freedom Grove. My Freedom Grove is specialized just for men, so that they can get those kind of self-coaching skills. They can have an opportunity for courses. They can have an opportunity for one-on-one coaching. They also have their peers that I am trying to develop everybody to be able to share what their stories are. Because once they share their story, it's going to create a lot of healing for everybody else to know that they're not alone. And especially if these men have already gone through and had coaching and they've resolved whatever that pain was, and now they feel a lot better, I want to pair them up together, because I might have gone through some specific kind of pain that I could help coach someone through directly. But there's going to be specific things that I've never experienced at all in my life, but these other men have. Right. They're going to be the best person for that individual. So the type of offerings that I do have one-on-one, where people can decide to just have a single time with me, or they can choose to have a longer period of time if there's something specific they want to work through. And then I also offer the Unshakable program, which is my men's online group coaching experience. And that has the courses in it. It has the one-on-one coaching. It has the peer support. And I have long-term goals of, once we have enough folks in this membership, of having a men's wellness retreat out here on the Mendocino coast in California. I found a gorgeous facility right where the ocean meets the redwoods and a river. It's just absolutely gorgeous. It's a great place to bring all of these great men together to try to help each other.
And I know that you're going to do it. It's going to be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's going to be amazing. And we're going to say, I remember when Gretchen had this dream to do it. And I remember that one of the very first times we talked about it, you talked to me about it, but this makes it's not that it didn't make sense to me then, but it's all full circle for me now. So I'm so glad. And if people want to learn more, do you have a website that they can go to, or a Facebook page?
I do. I have both, actually. So they can go to my website at www.myfreedomgrove.com, And then also I have a Facebook page, which is also My Freedom Grove. And on there, you'll be able to see all of the posts for all of the podcasts that are coming up. And you'll be able to also learn more about the types of options that are available.
And your podcasts, can they get them on any kind of
Oh,
podcast system or like
they
iTunes?
can. They can. My podcasts are available either directly from my website, or they can go on to iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or iHeartRadio.
That's awesome.
And they can also Google it. I've seen my podcast show up directly when they type in My Freedom Grove podcast. There's podcast episodes that pop up right there in their browser.
Gretchen, you are doing really, really important work, and your knowledge is amazing. And I'm just so grateful that you took the opportunity to come on today and share this knowledge, because I have a feeling it's going to be super powerful for the people whose hands it gets into. If you have watched this and you think it's powerful, if you can drop a heart where you can share a takeaway, it would be really helpful. And also, if you know somebody that you feel could benefit from this understanding of either the change curve, or if you know of a man that could use some services from Gretchen, share this with them. You know, send it to them in a private message, tag them here, share it to your own timeline, whatever you need to do to get it into the hands of the right people. So Gretchen, thank you so much. This was really, really wonderful. I truly appreciate it. And I have a feeling we'll see you come back on here again soon.
Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate it. Thank you for
Thank
the opportunity.
you. You're welcome.